All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Soul Powered Podcast. I am so excited about our episode today. I have a special guest with me here. I have Tiffany, who is a trauma hypnotist. I've been following her on TikTok since I joined TikTok, and I'm super excited to have her here. So, welcome, Tiffany. How are you?
I'm excited to be here as well. I've been obviously not following you since I got on TikTok, but when you started popping up, I was like, oh, this is so good. So I've been following you since you first crossed my page.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that we crossed paths, and so much of your message has resonated a lot with me. And I just shared before we hit record, Tiffany has figured out TikTok for those of us who are millennials still like trying to figure all this out and navigating this. I feel like my daughter is better at all this stuff than I am, but we're getting there. But I feel like she's kind of cracked the code and really has built an incredible following and community. So we'll dive into all of that. But let's talk about what it is that you do in the world. Who is it that you help and how do you help them?
Yeah. So the answer that my marketing coaches don't love me to give is that I can help everybody. I tend to focus in on helping entrepreneurs and then moms. Initially, it was just in the entrepreneur space. Then I became a mom and I was like, holy crap, moms need this. And, I'd worked with some female entrepreneurs who were moms before, but just my own motherhood journey really helped me see like how much easier, if raising a child can be easy at all, how much easier it is when you've done the inner work and you're not taking everything personally that your child does. So, what do? I specialize in helping people break the cycle of trauma, anxiety, overwhelm, and self sabotage so that they can really create the life that they see in their head when they're falling asleep at night.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. And for my listeners, you guys know this is a huge topic that I've been diving down the last couple of years. And so that's why I just feel like there's not as many people talking about this aspect of things. And so when I came across your page and just as I'm sort of being introduced to others who are doing this kind of work, I know that for me, this was the missing link. And I know there's a lot of people out here teaching on how to mindset, like to work on the mindset alone, right? And how to manifest things and to do all of this. But if we don't know how to regulate our emotions, deal with our chronic stress, regulate our nervous system, like it doesn't matter how much we manifest, it's going to be subject to self sabotage. I know this from my own life. And so, would you say that you've seen that with your clients as well, like before they start working with you?
Oh, absolutely. I always say that everybody wants the quantum leap, but we're still in like a physical meat suit. And so if we can't prime our nervous system to be aligned with that quantum leap, it'll be a very short term quantum leap, if at all. Right. So we need to bring the meat suit with us. And it's always funny to me. I work with a lot of like high level male entrepreneurs. I'm introduced as like the executive coach, the high performance mindset coach, and they're like, all right, so give me strategies for like to hustle more. And I'm like, that's actually not what you need. We need to heal that time when you were 5 and you weren't allowed emotions. And they're like, no, we don't need to talk about my emotions. But then, eventually they see my wisdom and follow my lead. And they just shoot forward so much faster because I think partly it's this cliche of like, oh, well, something in childhood messed me up, and everybody wants to be the exception to the rule. But I have yet to meet a single human that is the exception to this rule. And I genuinely don't think there is an exception to this specific rule that our childhood, if we have these adverse experiences, these limiting beliefs that are installed, they're going to impact us later in life and they will show up in so many ways, it will blow people's minds.
Oh my God, it's so true. And I know for me, I very much identify with like that more masculine approach because I mean, I had my daughter at 18 and I raised her by myself for the first 10 years of her life. And so I was very much in that masculine healing from a lot of survival mode, money trauma. We grew up below the poverty line, like things were not good at all. And so I took that approach too, as like the grinding, the hustling. And I remember I was called to work with a shaman who I was diving down like this spiritual path. And the first thing that came up was that I needed to slow down, and I actually, like, was called to take time off, and it was the hardest thing that I've ever done. I ended up being about 6 months that I took off, and you wouldn't think it's kinda, like, paradoxical, right? Back to the clients that you were talking about, like, you wouldn't think that that would have as big of an effect, but it was life-changing to be able to actually slow down and to heal from all those years of burnout that I was experiencing. It's just so funny how, yeah, we think that we need more strategy because that was the first thing I thought when I entered that coach's platform. I'm like, I just need more strategy. I need to know what to do. And the universe is like, nope, you're gonna just sit down and you're gonna sit there for 6 months, and that's what you're gonna do. And it was everything that I needed and more. So I love that you bring that up because it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this is lived experience because I was a very masculine woman as well. Even really up until I had my son, like I was still doing this work, had done my own healing, was doing this work, but getting pregnant with my son brought up a whole like another level of stuff that I had to work through, and being able to slow down, being able to be like, you know what, today's I'm just doing 4 hours because that's my capacity and that's okay. And I want to spend time with my son. Oh, it's a random Wednesday and I feel like going to the zoo. That's okay as well. And just seeing the shifts in cash flow still showing up, right? That, when we're in what I call a stress addiction, it puts us in this place of scarcity like, well, I can't because then the money is not going to come. And when we really start to surrender and regulate our nervous system, we see that it's going to show up for us. But oftentimes we create the resistance by having to push and always having to have the answers.
Oh my god, yeah, that was my life. So that's again, I love it, and I mean, obviously, there's something that happened in your life that brought you to this work, so I think that that might have been the video where I found you, where you told a little bit about your story, but anyways, can you share with us what brought you to this place? Like, why are you diving into this work? Why are you even passionate about helping people with this?
Yeah. So, what brought me to the work was a breaking point that I had at 28. So, I'm from Canada originally. I was living in Australia at the time, had been dating my partner at that time for 3 years. And he went away for a job interview one weekend. And I use the air quotes
Mhm.
very liberally there. And I found out that I was pregnant. I hadn't been feeling well for a while. So I took a pregnancy test, found out I was pregnant. And within the next 12 hours, I discovered he was not at a job interview, but he had a girlfriend in another state and he was away with her. So my entire life collapsed down around me. I didn't have the money. We were really living paycheck to paycheck. So I didn't have the money to go home and see my family. I come from a lower middle class family. So they didn't have the money to fly me home or to come and see me. And yeah, life just collapsed. So in that process, I totally was going to take him back too, because I just felt like, all these people were telling us, like, you have such the perfect relationship. Like married couples were telling us this. So I was willing to give him another chance if he could, one, admit what he had done, and two, come to therapy. And I booked the therapy appointment like he told me to, and I was the only one who showed up. And so that was kind of the point where my therapist was like, hey, why don't we start with you? You're already here, you've already paid. And nothing against talk therapy. What I learned was that I had trauma, which I'll talk about in a minute. I ended up miscarrying my baby, and that was the point that really brought me to my knees. And so I went through a very dark night of the soul. At one point, considered walking out in front of a cab to end everything because I just could not see the light at the end of the tunnel. Went to take the step, like physically went to take the step in downtown Melbourne, a city of like 5 million people, and my feet just would not move. So that's ultimately what brought me to the work, is my own healing journey, discovering all the things that didn't work, and then discovering all of the things that people like to say in the healing journey about, you know, discipline and willpower, and how that's not actually how our brain works. And so then I just became very passionate about sharing with people how they could heal themselves. But what I discovered in that journey was that I had trauma. So my mom had left my biological dad when I was 3 months old. He was emotionally abusive to her. And while he never laid a hand on me, the next woman who came along, my stepmom, was my abuser, which is ironic because she was a domestic violence survivor herself. In fact, she was living in a women's shelter when my biological dad met her, still had fresh bruises. So, and I was 3. He sent me into the women's shelter to get her. This was before cell phones and when men weren't, couldn't go in and whatnot. So I think that also led me to rejecting the feminine side of me and feminine energy, because I saw women as a weakness. My mom had crippling anxiety, and then here was this other woman who was living in a women's shelter. So I didn't see any strong feminine women around me. And because of the abuse I experienced, she would lock me in closets, burn me with curling irons. And she spent 2 or 3 years telling me that strangers hated blonde haired, blue eyed girls and would unalive them if they saw them. And so whenever I acted up, she would drive me to the outskirts of the town that I'm from and tell me to get out. So I carried that, but that was only part of my life. And I think one of the reasons that people don't seek help or they don't heal is because they don't realize that they've had trauma. And I didn't. Listening to my story, people are like, "What do you mean you didn't know that you had trauma?" And it actually took my therapist. This was really the only thing I took away from the 5 therapy sessions that I had with her, was she said, "So if this happened to another child, what would you call it?" And I was like, "Definitely abuse." And she was like, "Well, then why isn't it for you?" And so for me, it was only every other weekend. And it was only until I was 10. It didn't matter that at one point they threatened to kidnap me and I'd never see my family again. It was only until I was 10 and only every other weekend. The rest of the time, 95% of my life was with my mom and my stepdad and my half brothers. And there was lots of laughter and fun and camping trips and all of that. And so I've seen this time and time again with my clients, is that either they know they have trauma, but they don't believe that they're worthy of healing. They think that they've had that trauma because it means something, they're not worthy. And that's why they had that experience. Or they just don't realize that what they experienced was trauma. And so they don't know that that has to be healed for them to move forward.
Mm. Wow. We have a lot of parallels in our story, actually. And thank you for sharing that, because I know that that's all vulnerable things. And this is what really allows for, I think, us to normalize this conversation, which is, I know, a big part of my mission and yours as well, which is
Yeah.
allowing people to know that they're not alone. Right. And of course, there's big T trauma, there's little T trauma. But I agree with you. I think that everyone understands what trauma is on some level. And it's just something that was overwhelming, to their nervous system. And so it could have been something that was really small in the eyes of them as an adult, but if it was overwhelming to you, right, then it could leave a lasting scar. So I love that you bring that up. And can you talk about what you see sometimes in your clients? What are some of those things that maybe when you do get to the root of what it is that they're dealing with, that maybe they actually, like you just said, they didn't even realize that this was a traumatic thing that needs to be addressed, right? What are some of those things that will come up? Because I think it's important for us to kind of pull that out for people who maybe are thinking the same things.
Yeah. So I work off of like a pyramid, or I call it an iceberg model. And so the part of the iceberg that's above the water that we're aware of, right, is the patterns that aren't serving us, the behaviors, the actions, the habits, the procrastination, the people pleasing, the perfectionism. But when we dive into the part of the iceberg that's below the water, there's 5 main aspects there. So the first part that's closest to the water is our thoughts. And there's a lot of people who are like, change your thoughts, change your life, which is absolutely true. And if it was that easy, then everybody would have changed their life, right? So there's some strategy and some techniques that we need around the changing your thoughts. What's driving the thoughts is our belief systems. What's driving the belief systems is our identities. And then ultimately, our identities are created from our core childhood wounds. And there's 5 core childhood wounds that are the most common. So one is rejection, one is abandonment, one is humiliation, one is betrayal, and one is injustice. And so people can have one of those, they can have 2, 3, 4, they could have all 5. And so what I find is, there's this saying, like attracts like, but we don't always attract our exact like. We attract the puzzle piece that fits into ours. And so I'll share an example. After I had my son, obviously I had, the whole mom brain thing happen, where I was just like, I went from being like somebody who could remember everything to my short-term memory sucking more than anything has ever sucked before. And then I got hit with a really intense bout of postpartum anxiety. And me and my husband had just combined our businesses at that point, and we were working together. And, I hate the back end side of business and he loves it. And so I was like, I just want to coach and teach and create content. That's all I want to do. And he was like, cool, let me take care of the rest of it. And he would go in and he'd be like, wow, this is a mess back here. And he didn't mean it negatively. He was just like a passing comment, like, there's no like email automation setup, there's nothing. And I was like, I know. Right. But what it triggered in me was this humiliation wound that I didn't even realize that I had up until that point. And so I would then, my nervous system's already out of balance because of all the hormones. And so then I would get triggered and be like, well, if this is the way that you're going to be, just forget it. Just forget it. We're not working together. Well, my husband has an abandonment wound. So then my wound would trigger his, right? He's my like puzzle piece.
Yeah.
My reaction to my wound being triggered would then trigger his wound. And then he would go, so what? You're just going to quit? You're just going to be a quitter? And I'm typically somebody who can be motivated by that, like, Tony Robbins
Yeah.
esque, in your face. And so he would try and motivate me like that because that's how he'd been able to in the past. But now it wasn't working. It was just triggering my humiliation wound more. And we just go around and around in this cycle. And I see this so often with people is even if people, a couple of years ago, I had a guy come to work with me and he was like, I have a fear of success. Like I've read all the books. I know the belief system that's holding me back is this fear of success. And I was like, cool. So we did a technique and literally in like 30 minutes, fear of success gone. And all of a sudden he's now got this debilitating health issue. He's like, it kind of comes and goes over the years, but essentially I only have just enough energy to like do the work that I need to do to pay the bills. And that's it. Like I don't have the capacity to do anything that's going to give me an overflow of money so that I can go out and do things or enjoy my hobbies. And then he was like, I will do the celery juice diet. And as soon as I realize that it's taking my symptoms away, the symptoms come back. So now
Mm.
I know that this is a manifestation, right? Because if it's coming back every time you realize it's
Yeah.
getting better, you're holding on to it for a reason. And knowing his story, I said, I really think that this is like a fear of connection. I feel like connection doesn't feel safe for you because you have a narcissistic mother, an emotionally unavailable father. You never had anybody connect and nurture you. And then you went to school where you should have been able to be connected and nurtured to teachers and students, but both made fun of you. And every time you've had a connection throughout your life, it's ended up in some sort of pain or some sort of punishment. And he was like, no, that's not the case. I just have this thing. And I was like, just like, what if? Like, just go with me on this. And so we started going through it. And that was ultimately what he would do is he had this rejection and abandonment wound that made him think that connection was so unsafe for him, right? That he'd like go to a networking event, meet somebody, they would go for coffee 3 times or whatever. And then the fourth time, and it was always the fourth time that the person would be like, hey, like I had something come up today, like kind of like me with you yesterday when we were supposed to record this. I've been up with my son all night. Can we reschedule because I'm going to be a zombie? And he would take that to mean, oh, this is how they're trying to wiggle out of the relationship. They're
Mm.
not actually going to show up ever. And so, or he would meet people and he would just have this huge wall up. And so when we took care of that childhood wound, his business exploded. And, he was like, it's just like this wall has come down and there's just been this influx. And so ultimately, it's the core childhood wounds that we need to work on. But because the belief systems, the identities, and the thoughts have become so ingrained, we also have to do some rewiring of those as well.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And there's so many things I want to pull out of that, but I agree with everything that you said. And it really always does come back to that. And I know that for me, when I first started this journey, I just kind of thought that this was who I was. Do you see that a lot? Like, because
Yeah.
we've repeated these stories for so long that it's like, no, that's not it. It's just, I am not good at business, or I am not worthy of this, or I'm not good enough to do that, or, I don't come from money like that. Like, that was always the big thing that I would say. And that's the danger of it, right? And that's where we can get caught is when we identify with these beliefs, because that's always the surface level, like you said, is the thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because people will just be like, no, but I just am a perfectionist. I'm like, God did not make you a perfectionist. God did not put you here with that nonsense, right? I'm just a procrastinator. No, you're just a procrastinator because that's become your identity. And in order to stay loyal to yourself, you have to continue to procrastinate. So we have to get rid of that identity and install a new one for you to start acting differently, right? And this is really where like the fake it till you make it came in, but people really, took the shortcut to try and make it happen, is that we have to become the person who has the thing, right? If it's a money journey, we have to become the millionaire, which doesn't mean go out and buy a Lamborghini on credit and like buy a bunch of clothes and watches that you can't afford or a bunch of knockoffs, right? That's how fake it till you make it got misconstrued. It's how does the millionaire version of you think? And what did they eat for breakfast? And how did they make this decision? And then when you start doing those things, you're going to become faster, right? That's why we say it's the journey, not the destination. It's because it's who you become in that process that allows you to achieve the goal. And that's what people don't realize is, speaking of TikTok, my nervous system reset, I did a video and I said, comment if you want this free reset. And like 1,200 people commented. And I was like, there are no AI bots on TikTok yet. Me and my team are going to have to manually reach out to all 1,200 people. But what that meant was we had to go to all these profiles to send them a message. And you would be amazed how many people in their TikTok profile have their mental health condition, right? Like ADD, ADHD, bipolar, and like, cool, I'm all for normalizing mental health. And when it becomes your identity, then you can never actually improve from it, right?
Mhm.
Like we know ADHD is 20% overdiagnosed, which means there's 4 million people in the US alone who are walking around thinking that they have ADHD, but they just have a nervous system that's dysregulated. And even those who do have ADHD, they regulate their nervous system, ADHD symptoms drop, right? But if you continue to hold on to that and that's your identity, then you will continue to act in that way because you have to be loyal to yourself. Our identities create these hidden commitments. And there are so many identities around money. I mean, I had the lower middle class for so long. I was making like multiple six figures. And my aunt made like a rude comment to me one day, like, oh, it must be nice to do all this stuff. And I was like, excuse me, I am lower middle class. And then I was like, why am I fighting for that? Like,
Yeah.
why am I? And so I don't think people realize like how impactful their identities around money, around business, around relationships are, and how much that's holding them back.
Oh my God, it's so good. And there's this quote that Tony Robbins talks about, and he says that the strongest force in the human personality is the desire to remain consistent with who you believe that you are. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what he's talking about. Like, I always say, don't just question what you think is a belief, question the things that you say on a daily basis. Like you said, the literal words that are coming out of your mouth. If you're saying whatever you're saying after the words I am, that's your identity. Just listen to yourself talk. Record yourself all day if you have to. I don't care. Like whatever you're saying is perpetuating your reality. And that's what's going to be key to unlocking the identity that you have. So I love everything that you brought up there. And I love that we can again start to cultivate some awareness around this because I know for me, like a long time, I use those things almost like as a badge of honor,
Yeah.
like I'm a single mom. I see my mom do this too, and I love her to death, but she still to this day will say things like that. And, well, I'm a single mom with 7 kids, and, you know, like just the limitations in our language. And we kind of walk around with like that as like a badge of honor because it allows for us to justify remaining in the victim consciousness. I know that was how it was for me. Like, I did
Yeah.
not wanna step into my power. I would have done anything to not actually step into my power, even though I wanted it consciously, my body, my nervous system, the stories, all of the things, it was just so ingrained in who I was that I'm like, I love the fact that I can sit here and say I'm a single mom, and I'm a domestic abuse survivor, and I'm a trauma survivor. I loved it because it would allow me to stay small. That's the truth.
Yeah. And it's so funny. So I certify people in NLP, and there have been people who come up to me and they're like, I really want to work with you, but NLP, like that's really manipulative. And I'm like, but you're manipulating yourself every day. You're manipulating yourself to stay small every day. So why wouldn't I give you the tools to manipulate yourself to see what you're truly capable of in this life? Like when you say the words, I am, you are hypnotizing yourself. You're brainwashing yourself. You're manipulating yourself. Whatever words you want to use to describe it, that's what you're doing. And if you don't know this, and I didn't, right? I had all of these things that I used to say, oh, you don't know what's happened to me. Even when I became a mom, right? I wasn't a single mom. I just became a mom, but I had to rewrite what it meant to be a mom for me because I found myself falling back into this narrative of like, I eat last. I come last in the family now. And I see this in so many mom groups, and it makes me want to pull out my hair sometimes because I'm like, that's not a narrative that serves you. And no wonder there's so many women and girls in this world who are like, I would rather climb the corporate ladder than become a mom. Sounds horrible. Well, yeah, if you feel like you have to put like everything that you love to the side, right? One of the first things that I heard when I found out I was pregnant was, well, you're not going to be able to travel anymore. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. And like literally everything I've been told that we couldn't do, we've done and some
Yeah.
because we decided to take control of how we saw being parents. We had
Mm,
a very intentional conversation about what do we want to normalize for our son? We want to normalize having money. We want to normalize having experiences. We want to normalize exercise and self care and mindfulness and spirituality because we know that that's what's going to empower him. And
mm.
so, there's so many moms that I've talked to who are like, oh, but if I spend this money with you, I'm not spending it on little Jimmy taking a eighth soccer class in the week. Like little Jimmy's going to be okay without the eighth soccer class. But if he has a mom who's a perfectionist and constantly catastrophizing every mistake, that's going to leave a bigger impact than the eighth soccer class is going to.
Oh my God, I agree 1,000%. And I think it's like the biggest form of a love language is healing ourselves for our children. And then, like for me, I didn't have that luxury, if you will. I mean, this is my journey and this was my path. So when she was born, I was 18 years old. So I
Mm,
didn't know any of this. So she kind of has this like split type of, trauma responses, but I can help her heal those things now. But like we were very, very poor in the beginning, few years of her life. And then probably till about 5, 6, 7 in there. And then things started to shift. And so I noticed and I help her through it, but I didn't know any of this. So no matter when you're starting, right? It's like you don't know what you don't know, but when you know better, you can do better. And I believe it's the biggest form of love that we can give to our loved ones is to heal ourselves. The relationship that she and I have now is so much greater than I could have ever imagined because I validate her. I validate her experiences. I don't ever come back and say, I mean, this is just to someone who has children and maybe hasn't been perfect, which is all of us. Your kids are going to grow up and still have issues with how you raise them, no matter how it is, right? But we have to be able to validate their experiences instead of like maybe my parents or other people's parents have just said that didn't happen. That wasn't, invalidating our experiences is going to continue that cycle and that triggering. And I also believe too, like having that love language with your partner is really important, right? And like you said, learning each other's trauma responses, helping each other heal with these wounds, knowing your partner's wound, and then being able to shift your behavior is one of the most powerful things. I mean, relationships are freaking hard, and when you can know that and see them as who they are versus seeing them through the lens of your trauma responses, your triggers, or theirs. I mean,
mhm.
it's life changing. Like, how long have you been with your husband? Is this something that you guys grew together on, or were you kind of healed and then got together?
So we've been married for 4 years, together for 5. So I had done a lot of healing when I met him. I had done a lot of my healing in Australia, then lost everything in Australia, a whole other conversation. Had to move back to Canada. He was living in Dallas and he was really at the very beginning of his healing journey. And so definitely his healing journey have done together. And then, parts of his healing journey have brought up other things for me that I needed to heal. And now we're at a really good point where we're healing together in that we can have conversations about, okay, great line from Brene Brown. The story I'm telling myself when you say that the back end of the business is a mess is that I'm not good enough.
Mhm.
And I feel shame and I feel this. Right. And he can share with me, like, hey, when you're constantly pointing out all the things I haven't done, which, there have been times where I've fallen into that nagging wife. what we don't realize a lot of times as women is we're just got a million things going in our head, especially when we've got kids, right? Like this didn't get done, this didn't get done. And all they hear is you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And it slowly emasculates them over time. And so, how can we build them up? Somebody asked me this question the other day. What do we do when a husband is underperforming to
Mm,
get them to start performing? Well, in whose eyes, firstly, are they underperforming in? Like, where are your expectations setting him up for failure? But then also, if you're constantly pointing out to him what he's not doing and never having gratitude for what he does do, why does he ever feel motivated? It's the same for women, right? If all I'm ever hearing is what I haven't done and what wasn't done good enough, I'm not going to be motivated to do more or to try harder because it's just going to slowly chip away at your confidence. And so healing really in any relationship, it doesn't matter if it's husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, mother, daughter, mother, son, father, son, whatever. It's really about finding that level of communication where you feel safe enough in yourself and in the relationship to be vulnerable and share what's coming up for you. And to your point, like, I'm not here to shame any moms. It doesn't matter if your kids are 30 and you start healing, you're showing them what's possible. So, I've had clients who are like 72, I think was my oldest client. And she was like, I still want to show my kids what's possible, right? They may not be in that like sponge phase anymore where they're soaking up everything, but they're still going to see the shifts in you. And they're still going to see, like, oh, well, if mom could at 72 or at 65 or at 45 or whatever it is, then I can too. And
mm.
that's going to repair any relationship challenges that there have been. And trauma is part of the human condition. So, me and my husband are very aware my son's going to have trauma, whether it comes from us or it comes from a bully on the playground, he's going to have it. And so, the best thing that we can do, like you said, is to validate his experiences and then to show him how to heal so he's not carrying the baggage around, because that's where it becomes an issue. Is we have the baby boomers, then we have Gen X, then we have the millennials who are all carrying this baggage from their past.
Yeah.
And millennials are really the first ones, I think, and then Gen X or Gen Zs who are starting to say, I'm going to break this cycle.
Yep.
And like you said, that's the best gift we could give future generations.
Yeah. Oh my God. I 100% agree. And I also want to add that you're able to heal even past generations. Like I've noticed in my healing journey that my mother shows up differently. She has started to actually validate. It took a long time. In the beginning, it's hard to be confronted with those things, but she has started to validate our experience and not combat those things anymore. And I'm like, whoa, like that's kind of crazy because my intention behind starting this journey was, of course, to heal myself and for my daughter. But it is interesting to see how it kind of also can go up the line as well because
Yeah.
we're healing, right? And we're showing even our parents what is possible for them too, which I think is a little bit of a mind fuck, but it's still the way it works.
Yeah, and I mean, people listening, just be aware that your family may not always be supportive in the beginning, right? Like right now, I haven't spoken to my brothers in almost 2 years because they got very triggered by me sharing my story. I've never said anything bad about them or my mom or my stepdad, but it was, how dare you say that you had a bad childhood? And I'm like, I've actually never said those words, but that's how they were interpreting it. And when I got pregnant with my son, the way that we show love in my family growing up was to make fun of each other. It was the sarcasms, it was the jokes at other people's expenses. But I know the toll that that took on my mental health and my belief in myself. There was the running joke for so long growing up that I was like the ugly one. And I
Mm,
care, like, I know they were joking, but I took it to heart because that's what I heard all the time.
yeah.
And so when I set the boundary when I got pregnant that, hey, we're not going to normalize this for my son. We're not going to do these jokes at their expense. It doesn't mean you can't make jokes, but I don't want it to be at his expense.
Yeah.
And my parents got super triggered by that and they got my brothers involved. And, that's been the family pattern when I'm like, hey, here's the boundary. It's like
Mm,
4-on-1 pushback. And that's okay, right? Like if your family doesn't get on board with your healing journey right away, that's okay. Most of the cycle breakers are the black sheep.
that's the way it is. It was true to my experience as well, and so many others that I've seen. And There have been years. I mean, I'm one of 7 kids. My siblings and I have gone years and years. But now, again, it's kind of I'm at this place where I don't think that everyone will always get here, but I'm at the place where I can see it coming full circle now, and
Yeah.
my both of my parents are still alive for me to be able to see how they're internalizing a lot of the things that I'm sharing. So I do think that, yeah, it can be really hard, and I honor you for being that, cycle breaker as well, because I know that that's difficult. It's not a fun thing to be feeling like you're on your own, but that's also why the work that we're doing in the world is so important, finding that community, finding the people who you do align with and that you can resonate with and that do understand and that can help you, because it's just a tricky thing where if you're trying to do this all on your own, it can feel really difficult and you might want to revert back to those tendencies. And so I wanted to go back to one thing that you said as we're kind of wrapping up. You talked about us brainwashing ourselves. And I also want to just note for anyone who's listening, like, look at how much, even just through our conversation, society and other people are also brainwashing us. So I'm a master practitioner of NLP as well. What company did you go through? I'm curious.
So I studied in Australia through the Tad James lineage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Matt James is his son. That's
Yeah.
who I got certified through. So that's so cool. Yeah. I've often thought about actually a lot of people come to me and ask, can you certify me in it? And I haven't gone down that path yet because I'm not ready to yet. But that's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I want to just touch on again, just really quickly, like as we are recognizing the way that society brainwashes us, all these things that we're told, especially as mothers. I think being a mother today is harder than it has ever been because we're expected to be all of these different things. We also have to work. We also have to, most for the most part, leave the home and work. We have to be the wife, the mother, the maid around the house, the cook, the clean. Like, what the hell? There's
And a
actually
social media influencer now.
oh,
You
and the
still
social
have to do
media
that.
influencer. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you have to be on a private yacht, every weekend, or we're not good enough anyway. So it's like I just see this play out in so many of my friends and even my sisters, where it's like this feeling of not being good enough because we're not holding up to society standards. So, do you have any message for our moms who might feel that way right now, that they're trying to juggle all the freaking things and they just feel like they're falling up short because really, what is this arbitrary goal anyway? It's honestly unattainable. But do you have any message for those women who just might feel like they really need a little bit of encouragement right now?
Yeah. So the thing I always come back to when I feel like I haven't done enough, right? Like I still have those days where I'm like, I did not do enough. I'd had 15 things on my to do list and I only finished two or three. Is who benefits, honestly, from us staying in this hustle culture? And because the answer is not us, right? Stress addiction is the number one addiction in the world that nobody talks about. But what it does do is it makes us dependent on big pharma. It makes us dependent on Hollywood and the media because then we need an outlet. We need something to switch off. So we go to Netflix and chill and we go to, you know, Ben and Jerry's to get our comfort food. So all we're doing by staying in that hustle culture to meet other people's expectations, who by the way probably don't have a whole lot of expectations about us because they're so worried wondering what if they're meeting your expectations for them, right? But we create this in our head like Sally's going to be mad at me if I don't get 15 things done today, but Sally's over here thinking Tiffany's going to be super pissed and she's going to think poorly of me if I don't do all of this, right? Like people are so self-referential. They are so caught up thinking about themselves that they're not really thinking about you. And in the event that they do judge you, judgment is just a temporary reprieve. It gives us a break from the self-criticism and self-judgment. So if
Mhm.
somebody really does judge you for what color hair you have or what you're wearing or something else, I just feel good about it now because I'm like, I'm glad that I could give you a break from hating on yourself for a minute.
Mm,
Right. But all judgment does is it creates a set of rules that they have to live by now.
yeah.
So the best thing that we can do for ourselves and our families is to break that cycle of addiction to stress. You cannot feel happy. You cannot feel a lot of joy. You cannot find the inner peace, have the gratitude, have the abundance of anything if your nervous system is in survival mode because the bear is chasing you 24/7. And that's not the time to stop and feel grateful or to smell the flowers. And so everything that people think meeting the expectations is going to bring them is actually available now,
Mm,
right? Like the abundance, the inner peace, the joy, all of that is available now if we're willing to let go of the desire and the need and the addiction to chaos and stress.
mm,
So, we can normalize that, but somebody has to be willing to lead the pack. So I'm happy to be leading the pack, but I need people to come with me, right?
yes.
So, like you. So, you know, I think for our kids, the next generation, my son's generation's like the alpha generation, I think they're called. They're going to have a completely different experience because of the work that we're all doing to break this cycle and to show them that, you don't have to work 500 hours a week
Mhm.
to achieve something in retirement. Like live now,
Yeah.
live now.
1,000%. Yeah, live now. I love that so much, and this has been so incredible. I would love for you to share. So this is the cycle. Like, if you're listening to this and you wanna break the cycle, this is where you start, and I know that Tiffany has a resource. I'd love for you to share a little bit about what that is, so that if somebody wants to learn more about this journey and how you walk your clients through this, where can they find you, and what is this resource that you're able to offer?
Yes. So if you just look up Tiffany Toombs on any social media platform, you'll see my face. Feel free to connect with me there, shoot me a message, say hi. I'm most active on Facebook and TikTok with Instagram in a very distant third behind that. We've also got a YouTube channel. And then the gift that I have for everybody is called the 7-day nervous system reset. So these are the exact exercises that I use to help me navigate postpartum anxiety, that I give every single one of my clients on the healing journey, that people have used to break out of overwhelm and procrastination and anxiety. So, what it is you're going to get one exercise that's unlocked every day for 7 days because your nervous system's already overwhelmed. I don't need to give you like 7 exercises all at once. Some of the exercises, about half of them, are going to be part of a daily routine. This daily routine is going to help pull your nervous system out of survival mode, help you really start to heal your nervous system so that you can start to thrive. The
Mm.
other exercises are going to be tools that you can use in the moment when anxiety, overwhelm, overstimulation, any of those things are coming up to help you reset your nervous system to a baseline so you can better show up in that situation. So that's the nervous system reset.
I love it. Guys, definitely download it. Everything will be in the show notes as well as Tiffany's social media channels. Check her out on TikTok if you're on TikTok. I'm always checking out your videos and I love it. And thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. Thank you for the ripple effect that you're creating. Thank you for showing up. I know that sometimes the motivators need motivated, right? And I just want to honor
Mhm.
you for the work that you're doing because this isn't an easy path all of the time in entrepreneurship and having a baby, right? that like you're new mother, like this journey is not always one that many people will ever get to, and then let alone with all the other things that you had to overcome to get here. I just want to honor you for that. So thank you for
Thanks.
the work that you're doing in the world, guys. Definitely check her out. She's incredible. And as you can see from this episode, she's very, very knowledgeable in her space as well. And I'm super excited to be able to share this message with the world. So thank you so much, Tiffany. Guys, we'll see you in the next episode of the Soul Powered Podcast, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.